Okay, 3, 2, 1. That's it. So what I always do when I do one of these talks is I try to guess, what are you going to say? So you said polar bears, and you said bisons, and you said tigers, and you said whales. And I've guessed some of them. So I prepared some of them in advance. So I've got tigers and I've got whales. I put some other ones because people normally say elephants. They say things like gorillas or chimpanzees or rhinos. And if you look at all of these animals, they have one thing in common. They're really big. And they're mammals. So that means that they tend to have some fur, and they feed on their mummy's milk, and they're very easy to notice, and they're quite beautiful, and they're very striking, and they're very exciting sort of species. And nobody, and I'm saying this because nobody ever, when I ask them to name an endangered animal, nobody ever says the blobfish, because the blobfish is a fish and it looks like a blob. And it lives in waters around Australia, and it's kind of a bit sad looking, but it's still very, very endangered, and we still should make an effort to preserve it, even though it's not, striking and colorful and beautiful and all of that. And so to celebrate animals that are maybe not very beautiful but still need our attention, my friend Simon Watt started a society called Ugly Animal Preservation Society. And it's to celebrate all of these animals that are not quite as pretty, but still deserve our attention and love and care. Now, if we take a step back and think about wildlife conservation.
I will say.
Yes?
I didn't know that they are so big. But I on one of Himbio conference talked about it.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Not much.
Okay, so you're ahead of the game. Good, brilliant. You can be an honorary member of the Ugly Animal Preservation Society. Wonderful. Okay, but when you look at the species that conservationists try to focus on, they fall into several categories. And the ones that we've looked at right now are what is called flagship species. And so these are animals that are very big, very charismatic, so people are attracted to them. They think they're beautiful, they think they're very colorful or striking, and they are the ones who bring funding. So if you think about pandas are not endangered anymore, they're only vulnerable, but that's because so many people want to save the pandas, so many people throw money and put work into conserving the pandas because they're such an important species. Similarly with tigers, again, very beautiful, very attractive, and people really want to make sure that they protect the tigers. And so if you were knocking on people's doors and saying, could you please give us some money to support conservation, you'll probably have with you a picture of a panda or a tiger and not a picture of a blobfish, because it's not quite as attractive. It's not going to bring as much funding. People are going to say, well, why are you showing me this ugly little thing? No, it's not fair, but that's how, unfortunately, things work. So flagship species are the ones that bring in the money. Then we've got the umbrella species. So umbrella species are like orangutans or like jaguars, and they live in very big areas. They have very big territories. And so people are happy to support these large, again, beautiful animals. But when they say, okay, we're going to protect the jaguars, they are protecting an area that also protects other animals that might not be, again, as charismatic and as beautiful and as attractive, like the tapirs or the peccaries or some smaller sort of animals that might not be quite as cool. But because these umbrella species take up such big territories, a lot of other animals are protected at the same time. And then the third big category that we talk about is keystone species. So these are very important for the ecosystem as a whole. And so if you remove these species, the ecosystem will not do very well. So it will collapse. And here on one side, we've got the prairie dog, and on the other side, we've got the African elephant. And both of these are keystone species. They're known as ecosystem engineers. So what happens is with prairie dogs, they dig a lot of holes. They live in North America. They dig a lot of holes underground. And when they dig the holes, a lot of other animals will live in those holes. Some animals will eat the prairie dogs, like the black-footed ferrets, for instance. Also because there's so much now air in the soil because the prairie dogs have made so many holes, the plants will grow better. And they're very important for how the entire ecosystem is shaped. So if you remove the prairie dogs, a lot of other species will suffer. And if you look at the picture of the African elephant, if you notice, what elephants love doing is eating trees. But what they'll do is they'll rip out a tree trunk and they'll flip it over and they'll eat the roots. They'll nibble on the roots and then they'll go, this was a nice enough meal, but I'm just going to move on. And so you can always tell when elephants have been walking through a place. So this picture I've taken in Kruger National Park in South Africa, and you can always see the places where African elephants have been because the trees are everywhere. They're toppled upside down. And because of that, because they topple all of these trees, that means that other bushes and grasses can grow because there's more sun for them and there's more light for them. And animals that depend on these open areas can live in places where elephants live. So because of that, again, elephants are very important for other animals as well and plants as well. So these are the keystone species. So we've got the flagship species, the umbrella species, the keystone species. Important, but for very different reasons. Now, the next question for you to think about is, when is a species endangered? So how do we know? So I'm not asking you for an answer this time, just have a think about it. So there's, you might have heard of something called the red list of species. Could you maybe raise your hand if you have heard about it? If you haven't, that's also fine. But basically, there is a group of people called the International Union for Conservation of Nature. It's a very complicated, long name, that decide what species will be considered endangered and which one is not. And they look at all of the species and they look at what has been happening with the animals of that species. Are there more of them? Are there fewer of them? Are there big threats to them? What's going on with them? And they will give them a little category. So the ones that we don't worry about go in the least concern category. So things like, pigeons or rats or foxes will go in the least concern. When something is starting to look a little bit not good, but it's not too much of a threat, then you've got the near threatened. So, we should probably pay attention to these. Then vulnerable. So this is what the giant panda is right now in. Then we go to endangered, then critically endangered. That means, it's the very last call. We really, really need to do something about it, because the next step is extinct in the wild. That means that no animal of this species is left in the wild. They're only around in zoos and other facilities in captivity. And then the last one, the saddest one, of course, is extinct. That means the animal is no more around. So unfortunately, there's quite a few of these. And this status can change quite quickly, actually. So the picture here is of a Tasmanian devil. And in 1996, they were an animal of least concern. So you would think about them in the same way that you think about pigeons. Plenty of them, we don't need to worry about them. There's a Tasmanian devil everywhere in Tasmania. So that's fine, 1996. But then just 13 years later, they became endangered. And that's because their population, so the number of animals, the number of Tasmanian devils that has been left was 80% lower than what it was just 13 years ago. So poor Tasmanian devils, they suffer from this terrible, terrible disease where they get these big tumors around their faces, and they can't eat, they can't breathe very well, and they just die. So people are now trying to figure out how to protect them from that disease, whether they can be vaccinated or whether something else can be done. But because of that, this category for the Tasmanian devil is reassigned. And that also means that Australians, because Tasmanian devils live in Australia, are now paying much more attention to that animal. So if we look at how this falls within different types of animals, I've put these graphs which have different colors. So the black one is extinct in the wild, then the red ones are the endangered ones, the orange is the vulnerable, and then near threatened and least concern are green, and then gray is data deficient. That means we don't have enough information to tell. And if we look, let's start actually with birds. So if we look at all the species of birds around the world, we've got some 3/4. So most of them are in the least concern category. So there's, some are endangered and some are critically endangered, but most of them are fine. And we know a lot about birds because people love bird watching. But if we look at mammals, and people like mammals as well, so they tend to observe them quite well. First of all, only just over half is least concern. And we've got a big gray chunk. That means that we don't know a lot about a number of mammal species. And it's the same for reptiles, so your turtles and your snakes and your alligators. And for amphibians, this is even bigger. So the gray chunk is quite big, and also the least concerned section, so the ones that we don't need to worry about, is relatively small. So we are worried about amphibians, and amphibians are your frogs and your salamanders and your newts. And people tend to think about frogs as kind of slimy and maybe not that attractive. So here's a question for you. I'm going to name 4 types of frogs, and you will tell me which is the real one. Okay, so we've got, just listen up now, we've got a tomato frog, a banana frog, a strawberry frog, and a chocolate frog. Which one is real? Tomato, banana, strawberry, or chocolate? Somebody says banana. Okay, so if you think the tomato frog is real, raise your hand, please. Okay, and if you think the banana frog is real. Yeah, okay, some people, I think just one person thinks that banana one is real. What about strawberry frog? Strawberry frog? Ooh, no sympathizers. No hands for the strawberry frog. And if you think the chocolate frog is real? Oh, somebody, yeah, oh, quite a few people for the chocolate frog. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to tell you that it was a trick question because all of them are real. So here is the tomato frog. Yeah, it looks pretty much like a tomato, doesn't it? It's pretty cool. Then we've got the banana frog. Then we've got the strawberry frog. And then we've got the chocolate frog. Just kidding. There, of course, is a chocolate frog. So yeah, just next time you have your frogs and your food confused, just remember not to mistakenly eat the one that's on the picture on the right. Okay, so we've got our amphibians, who are not as boring as we might think that they are. But the next question is, why should we even bother conserving wildlife? What's so important about it? And some people will say that wildlife has what is called intrinsic value. That means that just the fact that the animals are there is important. So we have many species, and they all have the right to live, and they all have a value, and they're all interesting, and they have a right to be protected. Also, we can't just focus on some species because all of them make an ecosystem together. And another thing to think about is that when we cut down rainforests or destroy other ecosystems, we very often don't know what we're losing, because there's a lot of species out there and not all of them have been discovered. So it's very sad if we would lose species before we learn anything about them. So that's one way of thinking, that all wildlife deserves to live and all wildlife deserves to be protected. But some people say, okay, well, but that's not very convincing if you need to get resources for conservation. And so the other approach is what is called the instrumental value, where you have very concrete monetary, so very concrete money behind the species. So for instance, if you go to national parks around the world, so again, the picture with the giraffe I've taken in Kruger in South Africa, people go there and they pay money to look at the wildlife that's there. And this is how the wildlife pays for itself, because people will pay the tickets to go and to see how animals live in nature, and they can experience this. And it's a tourism sort of attraction. But then there's something called ecosystem services. So if you look at bees, without bees, we wouldn't have a lot of things. So first of all, we wouldn't have honey, but if you don't like honey, you're probably not too fussed about that. But we wouldn't have all sorts of fruit, because bees are pollinators, so they help the plants turn from flowers to fruit. So things like strawberries and things like apples and things like cherries, we would not have if it wasn't for bees and other insects that pollinate. And so we should really protect them, because otherwise, if we don't have bees, who will do that? And somebody will have to, actually go and do it by hand. And that's, of course, very exhausting and very expensive. But then I also have bats in the middle, and bats are important because they eat insects. And so they eat mosquitoes, they eat a lot of pests on crops. So farmers do like bats a lot. And right now, especially in North America, bats are suffering from a lot of diseases. And so their numbers are getting lower and lower. So it's a tough situation for the bats. And if there have been some estimates that bats bring between 3.8 and 53 billion US dollars each year to the table. So what they provide in terms of cleaning the fields from all the pests would have to be paid for by someone. So people do always think about that and think, oh, well, we should probably really protect bats, because otherwise, we'll have to deal with the pests ourselves. But then there's more to it. If you think about it, most of the medicines that we have come from plants. So even the medicines that you buy in a pharmacy, like aspirin, that comes from the bark of a willow tree. So you've got the pink flower, that's a Madagascar periwinkle, that produces a medicine for malaria, which is a very, very serious disease. Then the yew tree, the picture on the right, is the source of Taxol for cancer drugs. So again, a very serious disease. They provide the plants. They're provided from the plants. So a lot of these plants have medicinal properties that we don't know about yet, and we want to find out, and they could be really, really useful. And there's still a lot of research to be done. But I'm also putting a bear in, and that's because I'm not saying that we should eat a part of the bear and be healthy, because there's no specific proof of that. But if we think about this bear, what is it doing? It's sleeping. And that's because bears hibernate for the winter. So bears go to sleep for the winter. And if you think about it, they sleep for the whole winter. If you went to sleep for the whole winter, what would you need to do? You would probably need to wake up and go to the toilet, right? Because you can't sleep for all of winter without going to the toilet. And yet bears are fine without doing that. Or if you were asleep for all of winter, you would have to turn around in your bed because otherwise you would get pressure sores. So if you're lying on your back, then your back would be really sore. If you're lying on your side, then your side would be really sore. But bears don't need to do that. If you were asleep for all of your winter, your muscles would wither away. They would be thinner and thinner, and they would not be very good when you wake up. But bears don't have a problem with that. If you were asleep for winter, your bones would be getting thinner and thinner because they're not getting the exercise and the muscles are not stretching and pulling on them. And there's no nutrients to support them. Again, bears don't have a problem with that. But we don't know why it is, what it is about bears that makes them so resilient. And if you think about it, in humans, there are more and more older people who sometimes are very sick and they have to lie in bed for a long time. And if we knew how bears deal with lying in bed for all of winter, maybe we could use the same solutions to help people. But we can't just have bears in zoos because bears don't hibernate in zoos. So we need to have bears preserved in their natural habitat where they behave naturally. So this is something to think about. And then when it comes to the next steps, what now? What can we do about it all? Something I wanted to tell you is that technologies help. So very often we want to find out as much as possible about animals, and we can't always be there on site, and we don't want to scare them if we don't have to. So we can use camera traps, and the little rufous cat is a species that has been recorded on camera traps. It's a very rare sort of animal, and so people are very lucky to see the trap. But the pictures of penguins are there. This is a video footage recorded of penguins that are coming out from the sea onto the shore. And a computer is looking at the little spots on the penguins' bellies, and it's looking at the distance between the spots. And the spots of the penguin's belly are a bit like our fingerprints. They're unique to every animal. So it's possible to identify which penguin is which by just looking at the distances between the spots. And this is what computers help us do. So it's wonderful that we have the technology to do that these days. So we don't have to catch these animals, or we can just put a camera in front of them and get them recorded. And there's all sorts of other things. So from the early 60s, we've been starting with things like radio tracking, so putting collars on animals, GPS tracking, also the little thing that is the size of the grain of rice is a microchip. It's an RFID tag. So if you have a dog or a cat, probably you've taken it to the vet, and it has a little chip under its skin like that. The vet would have given it the little chip. And it's possible to scan it and see which animal is which. On the back of a bird, you have a little light and dark detector, which can tell you where in the world the bird is. Next to it is a seal with a time depth recorder, which measures how deep the seal is swimming. And here is an eagle, a steppe eagle that you might have heard of because 2 years ago it racked up a huge phone bill because its location was linked to a mobile phone. It was supposed to send text messages to the researchers, but rather than flying over Russia and Kazakhstan, it flew over Iran. And the phone bill that came to the poor researchers was very, very high. They didn't expect that, so they had to ask people to help out with the money for this. And now we have mobile apps, we have artificial intelligence that helps us identify animals, we've got machine learning that does that. So it's wonderful what sort of things we can use to help us find animals and identify them. And then one last thing for you is citizen science. So that's when people that are not necessarily zoologists can take part in research. So if you go for a walk and you feel like you're interested in a plant that you see, or a bird that you see, or a mammal that you see, there are all these apps like iNaturalist, like PlantNet, like eBird, where you can record what you saw. You can identify, you can take a picture, and it sends a location and a picture and the species ID to a central database where people can then say, okay, well, this person here has spotted this animal, and so we know that this species is present in that particular place. And if you've got a little bit more time, there's a website called Zooniverse, which you can use it a bit like a game. It helps researchers who have lots of pictures from camera traps or lots of other data to identify them. So you just click on it and you pick a project that you like, and you'll be able to go through pictures of camera traps and say, okay, there's a monkey here, and there's a tiger here, and there's a bear here. And it saves researchers a lot of time because they tend to have hundreds and thousands of these pictures that they have to go through. So this is something that you can do in your spare time, and it's actually a lot of fun to do. So that's it from me, and I'm very, very happy to take questions now.
But I have what to say. I will say now.
Yeah, if you want to ask questions, then by all means.
Please send the link in the chat.
With the apps, yeah, of course.
Not yes.
Yeah.
And with the site.
Yeah, and also I will send the slides to your teacher, so so she can also pass on all the information to you.
I have Untitled, but others I don't have.
Okay, there's eBird. I'm going to tell you straight away. eBird, that's for the birds, and then there's PlantNet. With an @ for an A, and then Zooniverse.org is the website where you can do citizen science. So all of this is very, very helpful. I work for a group called the Oxfordshire Mammal Group, and what we do is we collect information on what sort of animals we're seeing in the area, and we're making an atlas of what species can be found where. So it's always really exciting when people come to us and say, oh, I've seen an otter on this river, or I've seen a badger here, or I've seen a fox there. And it's good to know, because you want to know over time if there are more otters and more badgers, or fewer otters and fewer badgers. And if there's fewer, why that might be.
We have also questions from Vlad, and after please Artemi. So Vlad, please, first you can ask in English, in Russian, anyway. So
What is your favorite wild animal?
What is my favorite wild animal? I've got them sorted by continent. So this is a very difficult question for a zoologist to answer. But yeah, in Europe, I love hedgehogs. And in fact, I have a hedgehog right in my house, because I've been, in fact, do you want to see a hedgehog? Or
yeah, show it please.
Okay, give me a second. There he is. So if we give him a little
Is he
bit,
real?
yeah,
Great.
he's a little bit scared because it's his night time, because they're active during the night and they sleep during the day, but maybe he'll uncurl a little bit. Yeah.
It's cute.
Very beautiful.
Very beautiful, yes. What is its name?
Cute.
What is its name?
His name is Preston, so my daughter named him. That's her last name, actually. So yeah, so there he is. Yeah, I'm gonna put him back.
No, can you show it again, please?
Preston is very big. Thank you.
So so the story with this hedgehog is interesting. So I live in the United Kingdom, and when the summers are pretty, hedgehogs will have babies twice. So they will have one set of babies at the beginning of the summer, and then if the weather is nice, they'll have another set of babies in September. And
I want to ask one question. Can
yeah.
I? How do you think you can keep wild animals in the zoos, or you can keep them at home?
Okay, so let me just tell you why I have the hedgehog at home. So with the babies that are born in September, very often they don't fatten up enough for winter to be able to go to sleep for the whole winter, which is what hedgehogs do. And so if you find a hedgehog in October, November, which is very small and it has lots of health problems, then it's not very likely to survive the winter. So then we can take them in and we look after them for the winter, and then we release them. So sometime this month he will go back into the wild. But you should probably only do that when you know what you're doing, when you're looking after wild animals, because otherwise it's probably not very safe for you or for the animal. But I mean, zoos can be interesting because good zoos are good, but bad zoos can be really terrible. And what I mean by good zoos is zoos that think about the species conservation. So for instance, with Tasmanian devils in Australia, if it wasn't for zoos, we probably wouldn't even have any Tasmanian devils anymore, because Australian zoos will research how to deal with the disease that the Tasmanian devils are suffering from. They will breed the Tasmanian devils in captivity, so that there's a backup if they all go extinct in the wild. And they're doing a fantastic job in terms of conservation. But then there are zoos which would just kind of have these poor animals in small cages, and they don't do any research, and they don't do any conservation, and there's not much in terms of education. And I don't like those. So if you go to the zoo, pay attention and see what it is that they're doing for nature. So it's not just for us people to see the animals, but also what can we do for them, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so next question was Artemi. Artemi, you do not raise your hand now. Your question was answered also?
No.
No? Okay, please. You have no question, yeah?
Thank you very much for this presentation. I really like it.
Can you ask again, please? It was really quiet. Artemi? Okay. Artemi, please write your question, please. I can't hear it quietly and too quiet. And please, Alina. Alina?
Yes. How old is this hedgehog?
This hedgehog is, I think he was born in September. So yeah, just a few months old. Yeah, just over half a year. So he's a little bit fat because he doesn't exercise much, but and he eats a lot, but just 6 months.
And what does he eat?
He's cat food, dried cat food.
Do you walk with him?
No, but he walks around my room when I clean his cage. So he runs around and goes underneath that bookshelf. That's his favorite place. He just sits there in the dark, and I don't know why, because it's kind of dusty, but but he loves just going there. And when I first took him in, he was very upset when I was on the phone and he could hear many voices, especially men. Because I think because it's a lower voice, he felt a little bit threatened, so he would just huff up and be like, he was not very happy. But now he got used to it, so it's fine.
Okay, so thank you very much. Asma, please. Asma,
What does your pet eat?
What does what?
eat. What does your pet eat? What's the food of your pet?
Oh, so the hedgehog, he eats cat food. So it's just dry cat food. Like the little little pellets of cat food. If any of you have cats at home, they probably eat the same thing.
Oh, it's possible.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Pavlik, please, you also raise your hand.
I know why it is important to protect wildlife, because I know the story about Yellowstone. Do you know it?
Yes, I do.
About
Maybe you want to
Yellowstone
share
Park.
it. Yeah, the
About
Yellowstone
wolves.
Park, of course.
About
You want to tell
wolves.
us the story quickly?
Tell the story quickly.
The wolves were killed, and the ecosystem was spoiled.
Yes. So in Yellowstone in North America, they used to have a lot of wolves, and then they killed them all. And yes, as you say, the ecosystem was not doing well at all. So they decided to bring back the wolves, and all of a sudden, there was more species because wolves ate some of the big deer, which allowed the smaller deer to get more food, but they didn't eat all of the larger deer, so they were also doing quite well. And because there were fewer deer, more trees would grow because the deer didn't nibble on the trees. And the park was doing really, really well because of that. So it's important to conserve also these dangerous animals that eat other ones, because overall they're doing a good job in managing the ecosystem. So no, thanks for raising this, Pavlik. This is really important.
I think that is an amazing story.
Yeah, I like it too.
Thank you.
Thank you also. And Alina, please. If someone else wants to ask, please raise your hands or make some signs to know it. So Alina raised, and so please, Alina.
Yes, and if you took the hedgehog only for the winter, will he be able to eat the other food, not the cat ones, and catch its own animals?
So the way that we release them, well, when you release animals, you can do what is called a hard release or a soft release. So a hard release is like taking that hedgehog and going, okay, you're wild now, bye, I'll never see you again. And that's not what I'll do. So what we'll do is a soft release, which means that it will first go into the garden, and it will have a little hedgehog house where it can go back into. So it's got a safe place if it does get maybe a bit too cold for it, because right now it's inside a house, it's quite warm. So it needs to get used to the temperature. It will get a little bit of cat food. It needs to find it in that garden, but it's there, and they have a very good sense of smell, so they can find it. So even if he doesn't find any of his own food, he can still get the cat food. And eventually you will notice that he eats less and less of that cat food and more of the insects and the earthworms and the slugs that he can find. And that's when you know that he's ready to go his own way. And he uses the hedgehog house not quite as often, and he'll go and probably find himself a girlfriend and move on. But yeah, it's a soft release. So he's going to have some time to adjust to living in the wild.